Looking at prep test 11, game 3 here, dealing with some conditional reasoning for an in and out game. I am going to, deal with the one question in a bit more depth. But I do actually want to go through the process of doing the rest of the questions because question 19 it's the last out of 8 questions. So at that point, I'd hope that you'd actually have a bank of acceptable solutions to draw from. At that point, maybe there are some patterns that you can come to recognize. So I do kind of want to go through that process so that it's a little bit more like I'm coming at that question as if I was, doing the full game rather than just looking at that one question in isolation, because my approach to it is going to be tempered a bit by how the rest of the game has gone so far. We've got a housing committee that consists of 5 reps, one of whom will be the chairperson. The representatives will be selected from among a group of 5 tenants and a group of 4 homeowners. So I have my tenants here, uppercase, homeowners, lowercase, minimum of 2 from each of these, which means that we're going to have 2 tenants, 3 homeowners, or 3 tenants, 2 homeowners. The committee must include at least 2, okay, so that's the first rule there. The chairperson must be a representative belonging to the group from which exactly 2 representatives are selected. So if we have 2 tenants, then one of the tenants is the chairperson, in brackets, homeowners, same sort of situation. You can see here that if we only have 2 tenants, then we really have quite an imbalance in the out group between tenants and homeowners. We would actually only have 1 homeowner out. That's the kind of thing that, again, after doing a lot of these types of games, you sort of notice that, oh, okay, 1 homeowner out. Well, if I know, for example, that one of the tenants is the chairperson, I know there are only 2 tenants in, 3 of them are out. As soon as I know a homeowner is out, the rest of the homeowners are in. So these are deductive pathways that from practice, from using those pathways multiple times to answer questions, you start to notice, oh, this is something to pay attention to because that's something I can maybe connect to if I get the right information. So you almost create these trails in your brain over time. So that's why I think it's really valuable to do a lot of the same types of games or games that use similar skills, in a row. Anyways, okay, I go on these rabbit trails sometimes. So, okay, so we've got rule 1, rule 2. Then we get into our conditionals, which I love these guys. We just trigger, consequence, and the contrapositive. So if F, then Q, and the contrapositive, if not Q, then F. I will correct my notation there so that Q, it's obvious that it's a homeowner, not a tenant. If G, then K. And if not K, then not G. If either J or M is selected, the other must also be selected. So this one is going to be a biconditional. So if we have J, then we have M. If we have M, then we have J. If we look at our contrapositives, right, if not M, then not J. And if not J, then not M. We could also take that whole rule and just say M and J are stuck together. Like those guys are a pair and we can't separate them. Okay, so all of those statements could be summed up just as M and J are together. They're either in together or out together. Okay, and then M and P cannot both be selected, right? So if M is selected, P cannot be. If P is selected, then M cannot be, right? And of course, we can see how we'd be able to connect this rule here to these rules, right? Anything that happens to M also happens to J. Okay, those guys are stuck together. So that's one way that we could actually combine those rules. And because J and M aren't even involved in any of the other rules, we go ahead and simplify it like that if we want to, which I think is helpful. I'm going to make a note here, though, that P is a homeowner. Okay. And I did use the rounded brackets for the chairperson, but these square brackets are supposed to kind of represent that we're drawing a box around those two to put them together. Okay, question 12. So which one of the following is an acceptable selection? Just go rule by rule and eliminate. If we have F, we need Q. Okay, don't see anything actually breaking that rule. If we have G, we need K, so A is out. G, we should have K, all right. M and J are stuck together, so I can't see one without the other, which means B is out. And if I see M, I can't see P, E is out. If I see P, I can't see M. Okay, so I've got it between C and D. So that's probably where we're going to get the minimum 2 of each rule coming in. So what do we have here? J, F. Yeah, so with C, we have too many of our homeowners, right? All of our homeowners. That's not going to work. So D's got to be the correct answer. This is our first in our bank of acceptable solutions. Okay, so we've got J, K, and M, Q, and S. What are the players that are going to be out in that scenario? So everybody else. So that's F, G, and P and R. Okay, so if we have F, we have to have Q, but just because we have Q, we don't have to have F necessarily. If you have G, we have K, but just because we have K doesn't mean we have to have G. M and J are stuck together, good, and if we have those two, we can't have P. Great, okay. So one acceptable solution, keep it moving. So which one of the following lists 3 representatives who could be selected together? So there isn't a conflict to having them together. I mean, this one I would try them, but also do a bit of process of elimination, right? So like, you know, for example, if we have G, then we have to have K. So we can eliminate A and B and E actually. And then it's just between C and D. And in D, they've separated J and M. So C's got to be the correct answer. So with C, we have F, J, and M. Okay. And that would mean that G and K are both out. We could complete it as well, right? We know P is going to have to be out. And then our other homeowners, if F is involved, then Q has to be involved. And then R and S are really, you know, interchangeable at that point, right? So actually I don't want to do that. I'll just do Q, S, and then I'll go ahead and write the other possibility because I've got the slash separating these guys. Sometimes it's a little bit easier if you're doing the notes on paper because you just have more variety, right? Like you can make different kinds of markings and things, right? You can draw like a nice long straight line between the in group and the out group instead of having to use a slash and use a slash for different things. And you can vary the text size and stuff, just, you know, at will, right? Rather than having to use all these functions. All right, so we've already got 3 acceptable solutions here. We'll see how those might come in handy for question 19. If M is the chairperson of the committee, okay, so M being the chairperson, M is a tenant, right? So here's where we get this scenario coming in handy. So M is the chairperson, M is stuck with J. That means all the other tenants are eliminated, right? Okay. K being out does mean G is out anyways. We know P will be out, right? Because M and J are in. And so that means that the rest of the homeowners are in. So Q, R, and S are all going to be in here, right? So another acceptable solution. The first time that we're actually seeing only 2 tenants. Which one of the following is among the people who must also be on the committee? R. R must also be on the committee. Okay. If F is the chairperson of the committee, okay. So if F is the chairperson, that means we've only got 1 other tenant. Okay. We know Q is definitely in. And then let's take a look here. So I got that. And then, so which other tenant would be able to be with F? Certainly not going to be M and J because they're stuck together. Can't be G because if we have G, we also have to have K. So it's going to have to be K. And that's the other one that has to be on the committee. So answer choice B is the correct one there. In terms of the options that we have here, we can have any combination of P, R, and S filling those question marks there, right? So we could have P out, R out, or S out, and then the remaining 2 could be added with Q there. So multiple acceptable scenarios. If F is selected, okay, so F is in, means Q is in. Any of the following people could be the chairperson of the committee, except which? So the chairperson of the committee can't be another tenant that would require a 3rd tenant to be involved, because the group of 2 is the one that has the chairperson. So G would be the exception there. And that's something that I kind of learned actually doing the previous question, right? So if F is selected, then, and the other player in, in that, the group of 2, if they're tenants in that group of 2, then yeah, it couldn't be F and G together, right? Which would have to be the case if G was the chairperson. So A is going to be the correct answer there. This one doesn't give us any extra acceptable solution. It just kind of confirms the reasoning that we used for question 15, or reaffirms it, draws from it. If neither F nor K is selected, which one of the following can be true? So we actually have an example where we don't have F and we don't have K. In this case, M is the chairperson, but because M and J belong to the group of 2, J could be the chairperson instead, and we wouldn't have to change anything except where the brackets go. So C is the correct answer there. Again, not really needing another acceptable solution there. All we'd really be changing is who the chairperson is. Okay, question 18. If the chairperson of the committee is to be a homeowner, all right, so we've got 2 homeowners, 3 tenants. Okay. If the chairperson of the committee is to be a homeowner, which one of the following must be true? All right, so if G is selected, then Q is also selected. So if we have G, then we also have K, which means 2 of our tenants are spoken for and we only have room for 1 more. Since we only have room for 1 more, we can't add M and J. It would have to be F. Adding F means we have to add Q. So yeah, it's A. And I will say that actually the reason I was able to do that, I think, relatively quickly had to do with recognizing that if the consequence is that Q is selected, then there must be some connection where we have to pick F, right? That's really the way that we're going to get there. Unless there was some way that we could say, you know, we put 2 of the homeowners out and so we had to put Q in, but we haven't seen that pattern happen at all, right? Because R and S are both unrestricted. Apart from knowing that they're homeowners, we don't know anything else about them. Yeah, so A is the correct answer there. All right, so now we're on question 19. And so I did make some notes about this type of question in general. So it is in like the must be true family. So if we're going to do a process of elimination, we would have to do it by falsification, right? So in this case, it would be, is it possible to put both of these out? Is it possible to falsify the statement that we must have at least one, right? So the negation of that, of you have to have at least one, is that you could have neither, right? So is it possible to have neither? If it isn't possible to have neither, that means we must include at least one, which means that that is the correct answer and it must be true. So it's similar to the negation test, right? That this process of elimination by falsification is similar. So if we can negate it and it still works, it doesn't have to be true. Okay. And then another way that we can do it is we can look, you know, there's some pattern recognition based on our bank of acceptable solutions, right? So what do these acceptable solutions have in common? Do we see a certain pair of players that is just consistently coming up? Do we see players that can both be out and it doesn't cause problems? So for example, answer choice D, M and P both being out is possible if we take into account, you know, this last solution, right? P could have been out. We could put R and S in. Great. F and P both out. We have an example of that, right? So there are some that I'm doing process elimination, but I've actually already done the work for it. So I don't have to try falsifying each of these if I've already got that acceptable solution written out. So I think obviously it's, you know, for me being able to like edit things in a Word document, this is the benefit, of course, of a Word document versus being, you know, just with pen and paper. You know, I can create this bank, you know, I can move things around so that this exists here. I can do that quite quickly rather than having to like rewrite it in an organized fashion. But if you get used to thinking, you know, the work that I'm doing here, I want to make it organized and readable, and I want to write it out in a way that it's actually going to make the information accessible for me later on, then that's a really helpful habit to get into. So if you can kind of have a place on your page where you keep that bank of acceptable solutions, then, you know, that can really come in handy for some of these questions that would otherwise maybe take a little bit longer doing process of elimination. So yeah, based on that, let's see, I can eliminate A because I see an example where both F and P are out. I can eliminate B because I see an example where G and J are out. K and Q both being out. I actually don't see an example of that. So that one's still in the running. M and P both being out, we could have an example of that right here. So D I can eliminate. So I've narrowed it down to C versus E. Okay. Something else that I would note actually though is that even if you were starting from scratch with these guys and looking for triggers, okay, so looking for the players that are absent having the farthest reaching consequences, F being out is a consequence, not a trigger. So that could easily be a trap answer, right? For someone who misinterpreted this rule and thought that F was necessary rather than sufficient, and created the contrapositive wrong, was going backwards against the arrow for this, thinking that not having F is a trigger when in fact that's not the case. Same with B, right? Not having G, not a trigger. And D, not having M isn't a trigger, not having P isn't a trigger, at least in their relationship towards one another, right? So we could have both of them out, that there's absolutely no problem with that. Of course, not having M means that we also don't have J. And not having J means we also don't have M. So we do actually see triggers in B and D, but there's only one trigger in B and one trigger in D, whereas C, we actually see both of those are triggers. So that looks, maybe more promising. And with E, we're removing both of our wildcards, right? So that's also a bit of a pattern that we see, that sometimes we actually can't remove both wildcards because then we just don't have enough, restricted players that will not have conflicts with each other, right? That are compatible to be together. So this is pattern recognition from practice, but these are the kinds of things that are going to be helpful for a question like this. So we've narrowed it down to C and E. At that point, I would do, try to create those solutions. So if we put K out, we also have to put G out. And if we put Q out, then we also have to put F out, and then everybody else has to be in. So this one's relatively easy to try out, because you just then have to put everybody else in. And what we'll notice is that we end up having to put M and P both in, which is not allowed, right? So we would have M and J in, and then we'd have to have all the rest of the homeowners, which would be P, R, and S, but M and P being in together, not allowed, right? If M is in, P is out. If P is in, M is out. So C, we've realized it's just not possible to have both K and Q out. Okay, so we have a bunch of solutions here. All of these we have Q in, right? So even when we put F out, we're still putting Q in. So that's kind of interesting. We also, though, see either R or S in all of these solutions, right? So we could look at that. If both R and S are out, then that means that P and Q both have to be in. Okay, that means that M and J are out if P is in, and so we're going to have F, G, and K in. So this one, we shouldn't have a problem, right? So F is in, Q is in, G is in, K is in, P is in, so M and J are out, right? Followed all our rules, and that one works out fine. So, double, triple confirmation that C is the correct answer. Okay. Yeah. But I would say, even if I hadn't done all of the bank of acceptable solution stuff before getting to that point, C would be the first one I would have tried, because I do see that K being out and Q being out are both triggers. So I would have go started there. And so that can save a bit of time without using that bank of acceptable solutions. So I think, yeah, the bank of acceptable solutions is definitely useful, and learning from each question that you do, right? Like you're building on your knowledge, on your kind of like mind map of the game and how these things interact with each other. And that's something that kind of like, you know, people who like play a lot of board games, if you introduce them to a brand new board game, they're likely to pick it up much more quickly than someone who rarely ever plays board games, because they've already seen this different types of patterns that can go into it. And actually, I mean, if there was anything, you know, if you had like some kind of hobby or something that you wanted to take up while studying for the LSAT, playing board games, especially ones that involve any kind of, you know, logic or that chain reaction kind of process. It's, yeah, not a bad idea if you're looking to replace some of your leisure time with like LSAT helpful leisure time. But yeah, I mean, it's not a totally serious recommendation. I wouldn't recommend that. I think the most important thing about leisure time is that it actually is truly leisure time, and you get to rest and recuperate and not think about LSAT stuff. So yeah, I hope that helps. You know, when you encounter more of that question type, and yeah, also just recognizing that anytime they're saying that something must be true, if you're going to eliminate, you can do that by attempting to falsify. And if you can falsify it, then you can eliminate it, right? So if it can be false, it doesn't have to be true. So in a must be true question, you know, one thing must be true, 4 things could be false. So if you're doing process elimination, that's the way you want to do it. Yeah, so I think, yeah, the takeaways would be, how would the process of elimination work, right? How can you kind of have that at your fingertips so that you can immediately go into that process and do it relatively quickly? How can you use your bank of acceptable solutions? And then also, what are some of the patterns that we would see with, you know, triggers and consequences, and the types of players that we see in this game, right? So players that exist as triggers, right? Either in the original condition as the sufficient condition, or in the contrapositive, you know, that the absence of that thing, the absence of the necessary condition, can allow us to come to a conclusion as well. Yeah, so I'll leave it there. I think I've probably talked enough. So that's a fairly long-winded explanation for that question, but we went over the whole game. So yeah, I hope that helps. Let me know if you have any follow-up questions.